The demand cracked through the cabin like a slap move to the back. That seat belongs to her. Every eye turned toward the woman in jeans, quiet, composed, and suddenly the target of a billionaire bully and a power-drunk flight attendant. She felt the humiliation rising, the sting of being treated like an inconvenience instead of a customer. Phones lifted, whispers spread. The entitled passenger smirked, certain her status guaranteed victory. The flight attendant doubled down, convinced he could force her out. But what none of them knew, what only the reader knows, is that the woman they tried to push aside wasn't powerless. She owned the airline, and their downfall had already begun. Sarafina Jordan was by any metric one of the most powerful women in the aviation industry. As the chief executive officer of Meridian Airways, she controlled a fleet of over 800 aircraft, a workforce of 90,000 tolls, and a multi-billion-dollar budget. Her face had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. Her keynote speeches on logistics and market disruption were standing room only. But today, sitting in the public departure lounge of LAX Terminal 7, she was nobody. She wore no makeup. Her hair, usually in a sleek, commanding press, was pulled back into a simple tight bun. She wore wire-rimmed glasses, instead of her contacts a pair of worn-in jeans, a simple grey turtleneck, and a pair of nondescript sneakers. The only item that hinted at her status was the simple, elegant watch on her wrist. A vintage Patek Philippe her father had left her, but it was discreet enough to be overlooked. She looked less like a CIO and more like a weary university professor. This was the point. Meridian Airways was in trouble. Not financially, not yet, but culturally. The stock was stable, but customer satisfaction scores were plummeting. The reports landing on her desk told a story of two airlines. One, the high-gloss luxury brand she marketed, and another, a rotting infrastructure of employee cynicism, systemic bias, and a dangerous obsession with status over safety and service. The complaints were ugly. Passengers of color reported being passed over for upgrades. Muslim passengers reported random security checks at the gate, far too often to be random. And a disturbing number of reports mentioned a culture of entitlement among the senior flight crews who saved the best service for passengers in the platinum executive tier while treating standard economy passengers with disdain. Her father, Robert Jordan, had founded Meridian as a budget-friendly people-first airline. "We fly people, not status points," he used to say. Sarafina had taken his small company and made it a global giant. But she feared she had lost its soul. So she was pulling an undercover boss, but without the cameras. She had booked a multi-leg journey under an assumed name, Sarah Jones, on her own airline LAX, to JFK, to London, back to Dallas. She was flying commercial, checking her own bags and watching. Her journey had already been illuminating. The check-in agent had been curt. The baggage handler she watched through the window had thrown her bag onto the conveyor belt with such force she winced. And now, in the public lounge, she saw a Meridian gate agent snap at an elderly couple who asked a simple question about boarding zones. She diligently typed notes into a locked file on her phone. LAX T7 Gate 72B agent name P. Davis hostile tone, no eye contact. Clear lack of empathy, needs immediate retraining. Her flight MA451 to JFK was in first class. She always flew first on these audits because it was where the company's best was supposed to be. It was also, paradoxically, where the worst behavior often festered. The first-class cabin was a microcosm of the status-obsessed culture she was trying to dismantle. She watched the platinum executive line begin to form a self-important huddle of people who had already been pre-boarding for 10 minutes. A woman at the front of the line, dripping in gold jewelry and wearing sunglasses indoors, was tapping her foot impatiently. Sarafina sighed, her shoulders aching. She wasn't just tired from the observation. She was tired from the fight. The old guard on her board of directors' men who had been her father's colleagues were fighting her modernization efforts. These new age sensitivity trainings are a waste of money, Serafina. One of them, Marcus Thorne, had boomed at the last meeting. You coddle the staff, you spoil the customers, you just need to run the planes on time. People are the business, Marcus, she had replied, her voice dangerously quiet. And our people are telling us we're failing. PR fluff, he'd scoffed. This trip was her ammunition. She wasn't just collecting anecdotes, she was collecting the data to save her father's legacy from the very people who claimed to protect it. Now boarding first-class cabin 1, a voice droned over the PA. Serafina stood up, blending into the small crowd. Just another face. She pulled her simple roller bag behind her and walked toward the gate, toward the flight that would change everything. In the Meridian Zenith Lounge, reserved for the airline's most elite flyers, Margaret Coington was holding court, and I told him she announced her voice carrying across the hushed room. I said, Richard, if that imbecile at Covington Capital can't close the Singapore deal, you fire him. You fire his entire family. She laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Margaret, or Mags, to her small circle was not old money. She was current money, and she wielded it like a freshly sharpened weapon. Her husband, Richard Coington, ran one of the most ruthless private equity firms in the country. Their wealth was vast, abrasive and new. Margaret's identity was built entirely upon it. Her status as a platinum executive, 7-star million-miler with Meridian, was in her mind a title of nobility. She was flying to New York with her husband, who was already on a conference call in a private booth, ignoring her. They were in seats 1B and 1C. She despised 1B. It was the aisle. She always had the window. 1A she had complained to her travel agent, who had assured her it was all taken care of. A lounge attendant, a young woman named Chloe, approached with a nervous smile. Mrs. Coington, another glass of champagne. Is it the real champagne, or that dreadful Procco you tried to pass off on me last time? Margaret sneered, not looking up from her phone. The Dom Perinol Mom, as requested. Fine. And tell the gate agent I want to pre-board. I don't like to mix with the rush. Of course, Mrs. Coington will call you personally. Chloe skewered away. She hated when Margaret Coington flew. The entire staff did. She was a known tyrant, famous for writing scathing career-ending reviews if her water wasn't the precise brand of Norwegian spring water she demanded. At the gate, another drama was unfolding. Thomas Brodie, a senior flight attendant, was checking his manifest. He was handsome in a sharp, angular way, and he wore his Meridian uniform like a bespoke suit. Thomas was ambitious. He had been with Meridian for 4 years and was consumed with bitterness. He'd been passed over for a purse-ahead cabin attendant position twice. He blamed the company's diversity quotas and soft management. He believed the old way was the best way. Cater to the whales and the rest will follow. He saw Margaret Coington's name on the first-class manifest. 1B. He smiled. He knew her well. She was demanding, yes, but she was also a direct line to the people who mattered. Impress her, and a good word might get back to management. He also saw her husband, Richard Coington, in 1C, big whales. Then he looked at 1A Sarah Jones. He'd never heard of her. No status, no special requests, and nobody who probably used points to upgrade. He saw the gate agent, Ben Miller, looking overwhelmed. Ben was new, barely 20, and one of the good ones. He was patiently explaining to an anxious family that their seats were together just across the aisle. Ben. Thomas snapped, striding over. Stop coddling the economy cattle and focus on the priority line. We're behind schedule. I was just... Ben stammered. Do your job. Thomas cut him off. He turned to the first-class line and flashed his brilliant plastic smile. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will begin pre-boarding for our first-class cabin momentarily. Serafina, standing near the back of the line, watched this interaction. She knew Thomas's type. They were all over the airline. They saw the uniform not as a symbol of service or safety, but as a sliver of power. They were the ones who believed customer service meant fing over the rich and ignoring the poor. She typed another note. Mayve Fun 51. FA name T. Brody arrogant, dismissive of junior staff, creates hostile gate environment. The lounge attendant, Chloe, came bustling through, parting the crowd. Mrs. Covington, right this way. We'll get you on board before anyone else. Margaret sauntered past the other first-class passengers, her husband trailing behind her, still barking into his phone. She handed her boarding pass to Thomas, who practically bowed. Mrs. Covington, a genuine pleasure to have you with us today. Thomas gushed. Welcome aboard. Can I take your coat? Just make sure my oversized carry-on has space, Thomas. The one with the hat box. I will not be checking it. Of course, Mom. Right this way. Serafina watched the performance, her stomach tightening. This was the very rot she was here to find. The prioritization of one passenger's hat box over the dignity of the entire boarding process. Ben, the gate agent, caught her eye and gave her a small, apologetic smile, as if to say, "Sorry you have to see this." Serafina gave him a tiny nod of acknowledgement. At least there was one. Now boarding all first-class passengers, Ben announced. Serafina stepped forward, handed Ben her pass. He scanned it. Thank you, Miss Jones. Welcome aboard. You're in 1A, the window seat on the left. Thank you, Ben, she said, making a point to use his name. He looked up, surprised that she'd noticed it. Have a great flight. As she stepped into the jet bridge, she had no idea that her name, Ms. Jones, was about to become the center of a storm. Serafina settled into 1A. It was her favorite seat, not just as CEO, but as an aviation enthusiast. The forwardmost window on the port side. It offered an unparalleled view of the engine and the wing. She loved the physics of it, all the controlled, elegant violence of takeoff. She was arranging her things, a novel, a bottle of water, and her phone for notes, when Margaret Covington stormed back out of the galley, her face a mask of thunder. Her husband had already settled into 1C, the aisle seat on the opposite side, and had his noise-cancelling headphones on. His eyes closed. He was checked out. Margaret stopped in the aisle and glared down at Serafina. "Excuse me," Margaret said. "It wasn't a question." Serafina looked up. "Yes, you're in my seat." Serafina blinked, maintaining her weary professor persona. "I'm sorry. I don't think so. My boarding pass says 1A. I don't care what your pass says." Margaret snapped her voice loud enough to make the passenger in 2A look up. "I always sit in 1A. My husband is in 1C. We need this row. You need to move." The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of the demand hung in the air. Serafina, who had negotiated multi-billion-dollar contracts with hostile unions and arrogant aircraft manufacturers, felt a familiar, cold calm settle over her. This was a test. "I'm afraid this is my assigned seat," Serafina said, politely but firmly. "I'm quite comfortable here. Perhaps the flight attendant can find another seat for you, if 1B isn't your liking." Margaret's jaw dropped. She was so accustomed to people capitulating to her demands that the polite no hit her like a physical slap. Did you just say no to me?" she sputtered. "I'm declining your request to switch seats." "Yes, Thomas," Margaret shrieked, spinning around. Thomas Brody materialized from the galley, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mrs. Covington, is everything all right?" This person, Margaret, pointed a diamond-encrusted finger at Serafina, is refusing to move. "She's in my seat." Thomas looked from Margaret's furious face to Serafina's calm one. He saw a platinum executive wife of a corporate titan. and he saw a nondescript woman in jeans who looked like she didn't belong in first class in the first place. He made a calculation. It was the wrong one. "Mom," he said to Sarafina, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm Senior Flight Attendant Thomas Brodie. It seems we have a small issue with the seating." "There's no issue," Sarafina said calmly. "I'm in my assigned seat, 1A. This passenger is in 1B. She wants my seat. I have declined to move." Thomas's plastic smile tightened. This was not the quick, subservient apology he expected. "I understand, Mom," he said, as if speaking to a child. "But Mrs. Coington is one of our most valued high-priority flyers. Her husband is in 1C. We need to accommodate their request to sit together." "They are together," Sarafina pointed out. 1B and 1C are right next to each other. "I'm across the aisle. The first-class cabin on this particular 7 was a 121 configuration. Sarafina was in a solo pod by the window. Mr. and Mrs. Coington were in the center, 2 pods. Margaret wasn't just asking for a switch. She was asking for Sarafina's specific, desirable window seat, while her husband was in a completely different section of the row. Thomas's patience snapped. The lie was exposed. This wasn't about sitting together. This was a power play. "Mrs. Coington," he said, turning to Margaret with a fing smile, "why don't you get comfortable in 1C with your husband, and I'll take 1B. I will handle this. I'm not sitting in 1C. That's Richard's seat. I want 1A, Margaret insisted. Thomas turned back to Sarafina. His eyes were cold. The smile was gone. Mum, I'm not asking you any more. As a representative of Meridian Airways, I am instructing you to move. The cabin was now silent. Every passenger in first class was watching. Some were recording on their phones, sensing the impending explosion. Sarafina looked at him. On what grounds, Mr. Brodie? On the grounds of crew instruction for operational necessity. What operational necessity requires me to give up my paid assigned seat for another passenger's preference? Sarafina's voice was still quiet, but it now had a blade's edge. Thomas was cornered. He was used to people folding. He had no actual authority to do this, and he knew it. But backing down now in front of Margaret Coington and the entire cabin would be a fatal loss of face. He had to double down. Ma'am, we have a lovely seat for you in our premium economy cabin 12C. It's an aisle. This was it. The ultimate insult. A downgrade. A passenger in 2A gasped. That's outrageous. Margaret Coington smirked. The downgrade was the perfect humiliation. This was an order, not a negotiation. Sarafina Jordan, CEO of Meridian Airways, the woman who had built this very cabin, had just been told to move to the back of the bus. She looked at Thomas, then at Margaret. She took a slow, deliberate breath. A downgrade, she repeated. It's a very comfortable seat, Thomas said, his voice hardening. Now if you'll take your bag. And if I refuse, Sarafina asked. This was the moment, the pivot. Thomas saw his promotion, his career, his authority, all being challenged by this nobody. He made the final, fatal error. Mom, he said, his voice loud and clear for the cabin to hear. If you refuse to comply with a crew member's instructions, you will be in violation of federal aviation law. I will have you removed from this aircraft. The entire plane will be delayed because of you. Is that what you want? Margaret Coington folded her arms, her smile triumphant. Checkmate Sarafina held Thomas's gaze. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. So, to be clear, Mr. Brodie, she said, her voice projecting with the practiced clarity of a CEO addressing a boardroom. You are threatening to deplane a paying passenger from her assigned first-class seat to accommodate the preference of another passenger. And you are attempting to do so by downgrading her all based on what her appearance, her lack of status in your manifest. I'm Thomas, stammered Unus to such articulate, calm defiance. Get her off the plane, Thomas, Margaret demanded. She's holding us all up. Get security. One last chance, ma'am, Thomas said, pulling himself up. Move, or I call the captain and have you removed. Oh, you won't need to call the captain, Serafina said, finally reaching into her carry-on bag. But you're right. It's time to involve the flight deck. She pulled out her phone. Margaret and Thomas expected her to start recording. She didn't. She pressed a single number on her speed dial. Thomas scoffed. Who are you calling? Your lawyer? It's too late. The phone was answered on the first ring. This is Jordan, Serafina said, her voice transforming. The weary professor was gone. The CEO was here. I'm on MA-451 at LAX seat 1A. I have an internal Code 7 violation. A senior flight attendant, Thomas Brody, is illegally threatening to remove me from the flight for non-compliance with a discriminatory order. Patch me through to Captain Matthews on the flight deck now and get me a direct line to Frank Dempsey in corporate security. Tell him to meet the flight at the gate. We have a crew member to detain. The shift in the cabin was instantaneous. It was as if the air pressure had dropped. Thomas Brody's face went from a mask of arrogant authority to a pallid, waxy white. The name Frank Dempsey, the feared head of Meridian's corporate security, a man who reported directly to the CEO, was a bullet to his brain. What did you say? Thomas whispered, the blood draining from his face. Margaret Coington was just confused. What's a Code 7? What's going on? Thomas, call security. Before Thomas could even form a word, the cockpit door burst open. Captain David Matthews, a 30-year veteran of the airline, emerged. He was a tall man with a commanding presence, and he looked annoyed. What in the hell is going on out here? He boomed. We've got a Code 7 pinged to this flight, which hasn't been used since 9/11. And my console is lighting up with a direct message from the Oh My God. He stopped dead. He stared at the woman in 1A, who was now holding up a slim black ID card attached to a lanyard. It wasn't the standard blue crew ID. It was the black executive pass with the gold Meridian seal. Miss Jordan, Captain Matthews breathed his face, losing all color. I had no idea you were on board. The passenger in 2A, who had been filming, dropped his phone. Holy crap, that's Serafina Jordan. She's the CIO. The words ripped through the cabin. A dozen other phones immediately raised up, all filming. Thomas Brody looked like he might faint. He physically swayed, grabbing the bulkhead for support. Ms. M. Jordan? No. Serafina stood up. She wasn't tall, but in that moment she seemed to tower over everyone in the cabin. Her voice was no longer quiet. It was steel. Captain Matthews, she said, acknowledging him with a sharp nod. Thank you for coming out. I am here incognito conducting a service and safety audit. An audit which, I'm sad to say, this flight has failed spectacularly. She turned her burning gaze onto Thomas, Mr. Brody. You identified me as a passenger with no status. You colluded with another passenger, Mrs. Covington, to have me removed from my paid assigned seat based on her preference. When I politely declined, you lied about operational necessity. When I called you on that lie, you escalated, attempting to downgrade me. And when I refused to be humiliated, you threatened to have me removed from the aircraft in violation of at least 4 separate FAA regulations and a dozen Meridian corporate policies. You used your authority not for safety, but for prejudice. Thomas was trembling, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. Serafina then turned to the stunned, purple-faced Margaret Coington. And you, Mrs. Coington, you who believe your husband's platinum status makes you royalty. You verbally harassed another passenger. You demanded she be moved. You reveled in the idea of her being downgraded and humiliated. You, madam, are the living embodiment of the cultural rot I am here to excise from this company. Now you see here. Margaret finally found her voice, though it was trembling with a mixture of rage and newfound fear. My husband, Richard Coington, spends millions with this airline. He's a friend of Marcus Thorne on your board. You can't talk to me like that. You'll have what Mrs. Coington Serafina, interrupted her voice, lethally soft. A new airline to fly, because as of this moment, your platinum status is revoked. Your Millennium account is frozen, and you are being issued a lifetime ban from Meridian Airways for passenger harassment and attempting to interfere with a flight crew, which, by the way, is a federal offense. You can't. Margaret shrieked at I can, Serafina said. I just did. The gate agent Ben Miller had appeared at the open cabin door, his eyes wide as saucers. Behind him stood two grim-faced men in dark suits. Frank Dempsey's team, Captain Serafina said, turning back to Matthews. This flight is now under my direct authority. Mr. Brodie is a security risk. He has proven he is willing to violate safety protocols for personal bias. He is to be relieved of his duties, effective immediately. She looked at Thomas, her eyes filled with a cold, profound disappointment. Mr. Brodie, collect your personal belongings from the galley. These gentlemen, she motioned to the security team, will escort you to an HR holding room, where you will await a full debrief of your termination. Surrender your crew ID to Captain Matthews. With shaking hands, Thomas unclipped his ID. He couldn't look at anyone. He couldn't look at Serafina, or the captain, or the other flight attendants who were now clustered near the galley, watching in stunned horror. He handed his badge to the captain. Go, Serafina commanded. Thomas Brodie, the ambitious steward who thought he was playing the game, did the walk of shame. He shuffled past the silent first-class cabin, past the gaping passengers in economy, and off the plane, flanked by the two suits. He was in an instant a ghost. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the faint whine of the auxiliary power unit. Serafina Jordan stood in the aisle for a moment longer. She looked at the remaining flight crew who were frozen in terror. My name, she said, her voice, now calm but firm, is Serafina Jordan. I am your CIO. I am not here to frighten you. I am here because you am supposed to be committed to the safety and service of this airline. What you just witnessed was a catastrophic failure of that commitment. A senior flight attendant, a woman in her 50s named Maria, stepped forward, her face pale but professional. Ms. Jordan, we are deeply, deeply sorry. That was inexcusable. It was Maria Serafina said, reading her name tag. Now we have a plane full of passengers to get to New York. We are one crew member short. Are you certified as purser? Yes, Mom, Maria said, snapping into professional mode. Good. You're in charge. Complete your pre-flight safety checks. I want this plane buttoned up and ready for pushback in 10 minutes. Is that clear? Yes, CEO, Maria said, relief washing over her face. This at least was a command she knew how to follow. She and the rest of the crew scattered, performing their duties with a new, terrified precision. Captain Matthews nodded, impressed. Ms. Jordan will be ready. He retreated to the cockpit, no doubt to log the most insane delay report of his career. That left one problem. Serafina turned back to seat 1B. Margaret Coington was still sitting there, rigid with fury and humiliation. Her husband, Richard, had finally taken off his headphones, his face a mask of confusion. Mags, what the hell is going on? Why did that man call her CEO? Margaret didn't answer. She was staring at Serafina with pure, unadulterated hatred. Serafina walked back to her seat, 1A, and sat down. She looked across the aisle at Margaret. Mrs. Covington, Serafina said, as if explaining rules to a difficult child. Your lifetime ban is being processed as we speak. It will be active the moment we land in New York. However, you are still on my aircraft. You will not speak to me again. You will not speak to the flight crew except to request water or for a safety-related issue. You will sit in your assigned seat 1B, and you will remain quiet. If you cause any disturbance, if you so much as raise your voice, I will have Captain Matthews divert this flight to Chicago and have you arrested for interfering with a flight crew. Am I perfectly crystal clear? Richard Coington, a man who built his empire by knowing when to fold a bad hand, finally understood. He turned to his wife. Margaret shut up. Margaret Coington, for the first time, in perhaps her entire adult life, did as she was told. She sank back into her seat, her face burning, and turned toward the bulkhead. The plane door was sealed. The safety video began to play. Serafina Jordan, CEO, buckled her seatbelt in 1A. It was going to be a very long, very quiet 5-hour flight to New York. For Serafina, the silence was work. She pulled out her laptop. She didn't watch a movie. She didn't sleep. She typed. She drafted a new company-wide mandate, the True Meridian Initiative. She wrote a personal commendation for Ben Miller, the gate agent. She scheduled an emergency 8 a.m. board meeting for the next day. She sent a message to Frank Dempsey. I want a full audit of Thomas Brody's 4-year record. I want every complaint, every performance review, and the name of the manager who oversaw his promotion to senior attendant. I suspect the rot goes deeper. And across the aisle, Margaret Coington, stewed in a silent, humiliated rage on the last flight she would ever take with Meridian Airways. The moment the plane's wheels touched down at JFK, the karma began to metastasize. As the jet bridge connected, Serafina remained seated. Maria, the new purser, made the arrival announcement, adding, "All passengers please remain seated. We will be deplaning Rowby Row, and we have authorized personnel who need to board the aircraft first." The cabin door opened. Frank Dempsey himself stepped on board, flanked by 2 JFK Port Authority police officers. Margaret Coington, seeing the uniforms, went pale. Mrs. Richard Coington Dempsey asked, his voice flat. Richard Coington stood up. "I'm Richard Coington. This is my wife." "What is this Mrs. Coington Dempsey?" said, ignoring him and addressing her directly. "You have been served with a formal notice of trespass. You are permanently banned from all Meridian Airways and partner properties. These officers will escort you from the aircraft and through the terminal. Any deviation from their instructions will be considered trespassing, and you will be arrested." "This is insane," Richard blustered. "I'll sue. I'll call Marcus Thorne." Serafina finally stood up and gathered her bag. She walked over to them. "Go ahead and call Marcus. Richard," she said. "He'll be in an emergency board meeting with me tomorrow at 8 a.m., where I will be presenting this incident as evidence for his immediate removal from the board on grounds of fostering a corporate culture that protects cronyism over passenger safety." Richard's face went slack. He knew that tone. It was the sound of a deal being closed, and he was on the losing end. "Mags," he hissed. "Get your bag. We're leaving." Humiliated, flanked by police, Margaret Coington was escorted off the plane, forced to walk past the other first-class passengers, who were now all standing and watching phones recording. The Platinum Queen was dethroned. Serafina nodded to Dempsey. "Frank, good work." "Good to have you back, boss," he said with a grim smile. "The Brody debrief is illuminating." Serafina deplaned and was met by her executive car on the tarmac. The Sarah Jones experiment was over. The next 72 hours were a blur of calculated decisive action. The fate of Thomas Brody. Thomas was held in the HR security office at JFK for 6 hours. His audit, as Sarafina suspected, was damning. In 4 years, he had accumulated 12 formal customer complaints, 9 of which were for discriminatory or biased behavior. He had been coached by his manager, Alan Pierce, but never formally disciplined, because he was also one of the highest-rated attendants by platinum flyers who loved his Fing service. He was fired for cause effective immediately for gross misconduct, violation of safety protocols, and discriminatory behavior. Meridian's legal team sent his file along with the passenger videos and Sarafina's own report to the FAA, recommending a review of his flight attendant certification. He would likely never work on a major carrier again. The fate of the old guard, Alan Pierce Thomas's manager and the head of JFK in-flight services, was summoned to headquarters. He was the one who had been blocking Sarafina's new amphibious training. He arrived arrogant and ready to defend his best guy. He was met by Sarafina and the entire HR executive team. After she played him the video, she simply said, "Thomas was the symptom. You are the disease. You fostered a culture that rewarded prejudice as good service. You are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." At the 8:00 a.m. board meeting, Sarafina did exactly as she'd promised. She presented the incident, the videos, and the personnel files of Brody and Pierce. This, she said to the stunned board, is the service Marcus Thorne has been protecting. This is the rot at the heart of our airline, a culture that taught an employee it was better to illegally threaten a passenger than to disappoint a high-value one. Marcus Thorne tried to bluster. "Now, Sarafina, it's one bad apple. It's the whole barrel, Marcus, and you're the one who's been poisoning it." She called for a vote of no confidence in his board seat. With the evidence so damning and the threat of the viral videos which her team was already working to contain and get ahead of the board, voted 11-1 to remove him. He was out by noon. The fate of the Covingtons. Richard Coington did call his lawyers. They in turn received a cease and desist letter from Meridian's legal department, along with a compilation of 3 separate passenger videos and a formal complaint filed by the CEO. The letter made it clear that if the Coingtons pursued any legal action, Meridian would counter-sue for passenger interference and harassment and would release the unedited videos to the press. Richard's firm, Coington Capital, also had its corporate travel account with Meridian worth over $5 million a year summarily terminated. The fallout for Richard was immense. He had allowed his wife's entitlement to cost his company its primary travel partner and expose him to ridicule. Their marriage, it was rumored, did not survive the year. Margaret Coington was last seen flying coach on a budget carrier, and no one offered her a seat. The instant the wheels of Flight 45A1 kissed the runway at JFK, the fate of everyone involved was sealed. The descent into New York had been 5 hours of the most toxic, pressurized silence Sarafina had ever experienced. Margaret Coington sat rigid, her face a mask of mottled rage, refusing to look at anyone. Her husband Richard had spent the entire flight frantically typing on his phone, his face pale, no doubt, trying to rally his high-powered contacts. Sarafina, in 1A, had spent the time dismantling their worlds. As the plane taxied to the gate, the new purser, Maria, made her final announcement. Her voice, once trembling, was now firm. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to New York. We ask that you remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Due to a security issue, we will be deplaning row by row, and authorized personnel will be boarding the aircraft first." The words "authorized personnel" sent a final cold dread through the cabin. The jet bridge docked, the cabin door hissed open, and 3 men stepped on board. 2 were in the dark blue uniforms of the Port Authority Police. The third was Frank Dempsey, Meridian's head of corporate security, his face as grim and unmoving as granite. Mrs. Margaret Coington. Dempsey's voice was flat, carrying easily through the silent cabin. Richard Coington immediately jumped to his feet. "I'm Richard Coington. This is my wife. What is the meaning of this?" "We are being illegally detained." Dempsey's eyes remained locked on Margaret. "Mrs. Covington, I am here to serve you with a formal notice of trespass. Effective immediately, you are permanently banned from all Meridian Airways and partner properties for life due to harassment of another passenger and interference with the flight crew." You can't," Margaret shrieked, her voice cracking. "I am a 7-star Platinum member. My husband is friends with Marcus Thorne on your board. Your status and all associated miles have been revoked," Ma'am Dempsey said, unmoved. "These officers will now escort you from the aircraft. Please collect your belongings. I will not be paraded off this plane," Margaret screamed, clinging to her seat. One of the Port Authority officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, you can walk off this plane, or you can be carried off in handcuffs and charged with trespassing. It's your choice, but you are leaving." Richard Coington, a man who understood leverage, knew this was a fight he could not win. The sight of uniforms, the other passengers filming the finality in Dempsey's voice. It was over. "Margaret!" He hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "Get your bag now!" With a final murderous glare at Seraphina, Margaret Coington grabbed her purse. The two were marched down the aisle, the most humiliating walk of their lives, flanked by police. Every passenger in first premium and economy class watched them go. A sea of smartphones capturing the Platinum Queen's final undignified exit. Seraphina stood and gathered her simple bag. "Frank," she said quietly. "Good work." "We have Brody in a holding room at the terminal," Dempsey replied. "And the executive wing in Dallas is prepped for the ATM meeting. The board is curious. They're about to be enlightened," Seraphina said, walking off the plane her father had built. Thomas Brody had been sitting in a windowless beige-cold room in the airport's corporate wing for 2 hours. He had been cycling through indignation, panic, and a desperate attempt to script his defense. It was a misunderstanding. The passenger in 1A was unstable. He was protecting a high-value client. Alan Pierce, his manager, would protect him. Alan always did. The door opened, and Frank Dempsey entered, along with a sharp-looking woman in a severe pantsuit. "Mr. Brody, I'm Jessica Wallace from Meridian's General Counsel's office. This is a formal security debrief. I need to state for the record," Thomas began, his voice shaky, "that this is a gross overreaction. That passenger was non-compliant, and the passenger Mr. Brody Jessica interrupted was Seraphina Jordan, your CEO." The blood drained from Thomas's face. He physically slumped, as if his spine had been removed. "CEO? No, that's not. She was in jeans." "She was Dempsey," said, turning a laptop around, "and she wasn't the only one watching." He pressed play. The video from passenger 2A filled the screen, the audio crystal clear. Thomas watched himself lie about operational necessity. He heard his own condescending, threatening voice. "I am instructing you to move. A lovely seat in our premium economy cabin. I will have you removed from this aircraft." He had no defense. The video was irrefutable. He stammered, his mind racing. There was only one path. It was the culture. Alan Pierce, my manager. He trained us to do this. He told us the Platinums pay our salaries. The rest are just cargo. He said to clear the way for them. He's protected. He always bragged he was Marcus Thorne's man on the board. I was just doing my job. I was following orders. He spilled everything. The unofficial blacklist for non-status complainers. The way they'd save extra meals for Platinum flyers while telling Coach they'd run out. The entire corrupt, status-obsessed system that Alan Pierce had built. When he was finished, he looked at them desperate. You see, it wasn't me. It was him. It was the system. Jessica Wallace pushed a single sheet of paper across the table. This is your notice of termination for cause, Mr. Brodie. Gross misconduct, passenger discrimination, and violation of federal safety protocols. What Thomas shrieked. But I told you I helped you. You did, Dempsey said, his voice cold. Your testimony against Mr. Pierce will be very useful. But your choices on that aircraft were your own. You had the authority to de-escalate. You chose to abuse a passenger. You're a liability, not an employee. We will be forwarding this report and the videos to the FAA. Jessica added, We are recommending a permanent revocation of your flight attendant certification. It was a professional death sentence. Thomas Brodie, who had built his identity on the power of his uniform, was nothing. He was escorted out aside, door his career in aviation finished forever. The next morning, at 8:00 a.m., the main executive boardroom at Meridian's Dallas HQ was buzzing. Serafina had called an emergency board meeting, and the tension was thick. Alan Pierce, the JFK hub manager, was there, having been flown in on the red-eye. He looked smug, believing this emergency was about his promotion. Marcus Thorne, the senior board member, was also there, sipping his coffee and looking annoyed at the early hour. Serafina, Marcus grumbled as she walked in. This is highly irregular. What could possibly be so urgent? Serafina, dressed in a simple, sharp black dress, walked to the head of the table. Thank you all for coming. We had a catastrophic service and safety failure on MA 451 yesterday. A passenger was harassed, discriminated against, and illegally threatened with removal from her assigned seat by a senior flight attendant. I've heard Alan Pierce said, leaning forward with a sympathetic look. A terrible situation. That's why I've always told my people to manage passenger expectations. Thomas Brodie is my best man. I'm sure he, the passenger, was me, Alan Serafina, said her voice, cutting through his bluster. Alan Pierce froze, his smile vanishing. Marcus Thorne sat bolt upright, spilling his coffee. As I was flying incognito to audit our services, Serafina continued, I was personally subjected to the very culture of rot that you, Marcus, have insisted doesn't exist. And you, Alan, have actively cultivated. Now see here, Marcus bellowed. This is an outrage. You have no play. The video, Frank, Serafina commanded. The massive boardroom screen lit up. The entire board watched the incident from 2A's perspective. They saw the arrogance of Thomas Brodie. They saw the sneering entitlement of Margaret Coington. They heard the threats. They heard the attempted downgrade. The room was silent. That is regrettable, Marcus stammered, seeing the horrified looks on the other board members' faces. One bad apple. Was he Marcus? Serafina asked. Or was he just following orders Mr. Brodie provided a 4-hour debrief last night? He was illuminating. She pressed a button. Thomas Brodie's panicked voice filled the room. The Platinums pay our salaries. The rest are just cargo. Alan called it proactive service. He's protected. He always bragged he was Marcus Thorne's man on the board. Alan Pierce looked like he was going to be physically sick. Serafina turned her gaze on Marcus Thorne. For years you have blocked my reforms. You've called Antibious training PR fluff. You've protected a management style that values status over safety. You have put this entire company, its reputation, and its federal certification at risk. This stops today. I am calling for a vote of no confidence in Marcus Thorne and his immediate removal from the board of directors. You can't, Marcus roared. I'll the vote, please, Serafina said to the board secretary. One by one the hands went up. The evidence was undeniable. The link between Thor Pierce and the disgraced Brodie was a legal time bomb. The vote was unanimous. 110. Marcus was not allowed to vote. It's done, the secretary said. "Marcus," Sarafina said, her voice void of emotion. "Security will escort you out. Thank you for your service." Stunned, his face purple, the man who had been a titan of the airline was reduced to a sputtering, defeated old man. He was led from the room. Sarafina then turned to the trembling Alan Pierce. "Mr. Pierce, your employment with Meridian Airways is terminated for cause effective immediately. Your testimony was a confession of gross mismanagement and fostering a discriminatory culture. You will be escorted from the building. Do not contact any Meridian employees." Alan Pierce, the man who thought he was getting a promotion, simply nodded. Broken. He too was led away. The cleansing was complete. The video, of course, leaked. A passenger sold it. And CEO goes undercover. Karen kicked off flight was the biggest story in the world. But Sarafina was ready. Instead of a no comment, she posted a director to camera video from her office. "You may have seen a video of me on one of my flights," she began, her voice calm and strong. "You saw a passenger and a crew member treat another passenger with prejudice. That passenger was me. But the problem isn't what happened to me. The problem is that it has happened in ways large and small to you. And it stops now." She announced the True Meridian Initiative, a complete top-to-bottom retraining of all 90,000 employees, a new customer bill of rights, stating that dignity was not a perk. She announced the promotions of Ben Miller, the LAX gate agent, to a new role in corporate training, and Maria the purser to a new position overseeing in-flight service standards. The public response was a tidal wave of support. The stock soared. Passengers felt seen. The final piece of karma landed on Richard Coington's desk. His lawyers, who had drafted a $20 million lawsuit, received a counter package from Meridian. It contained the 7 passenger videos, a copy of Sarafina's formal complaint, and a draft of a countersuit against Richard's firm, Coington Capital, for enabling passenger harassment. That same day, his firm's $5 million corporate travel account was terminated. The lawsuit vanished. The public humiliation, however, did not. It was rumored the Coingtons' marriage didn't survive the year. 6 months later, Sarafina Jordan was on MA 4551 from LAX to JFK. She was in 1A. She was in her jeans. A young professional flight attendant approached her. "Ms. Jones, welcome aboard. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, champagne water or orange juice? Champagne would be lovely." "Thank you," she said, glancing at his name tag. "Thank you, David." "Of course," he said, with a warm, professional smile. He then turned to the man in 1B, who was in a wrinkled T-shirt. "So welcome aboard. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, champagne water or orange juice?" Sarafina watched the exchange. The same smile, the same tone, the same level of respect. David returned with her champagne. "Please let me know if there's anything I can do for you, Miss Jones. My job is to ensure your safety and comfort." Sarafina raised her glass as he moved on. "To the new Meridian," she whispered to herself. She turned to the window, took a sip, and smiled as her plane began its powerful, clean ascent into the sky. And that is how a single flight, and one woman's refusal to be bullied, changed an entire airline. Sarafina Jordan didn't just fire a racist employee, she tore down the entire rotten system that protected him and his bosses. Margaret Coington didn't just lose her seat preference. She learned that no amount of money or status makes you better than the person sitting next to you. This story is a powerful reminder that you never know who you're talking to, and the true integrity isn't about the perks you have, but about how you treat the people who seem to have none. What did you think of Sarafina's response? Was Thomas's downfall or Margaret's lifetime ban the more satisfying piece of karma? Let me know your thoughts on this incredible story in the comments below. If you loved this story of karmic justice, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves drama, and most importantly, click that subscribe button and ring the bell. I post stories just like this all the time, and you don't want to miss the next one.